So you bought a house. And without realizing it, you locked up more than just your money, you locked up your choices.
This is the part nobody ever warns you about because it doesn't hurt right away. In fact, it feels responsible, it feels stable. It even feels like progress. But psychologically, the moment fixed costs enter your life, your freedom starts to shrink.
Not dramatically, just gradually.
This is the lock-in effect.
And once it sets in, most homeowners don't even notice it's happening.
Here's the key idea you need to grasp. Your house didn't make decisions for you. It silently removed your ability to make them. Think about it. Before the house, your life was full of variables. After the house, your life has constants. Mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance, these numbers don't negotiate.
They don't take a break. They definitely don't care how you're feeling. So your brain adapts, but not by expanding your income first.
It adapts by reducing your movement, and that's where flexibility goes to die.
At first, it seems harmless. You stop considering jobs that would require you to move. You start ignoring opportunities that don't guarantee immediate, predictable stability.
You delay taking risks that don't fit neatly into your monthly payment schedule. You don't actually say no out loud. You just stop seeing the options in the first place. This is exactly how the lock works. Your brain prioritizes certainty over potential when your obligations are fixed. This isn't a sign of weakness. It's our basic survival wiring kicking in. But here's the problem. Survival mode is terrible for growth. Every major life upgrade requires some temporary instability. A house, by its very nature, punishes instability. So people unconsciously start to restructure their ambition.
They stop asking, what could I do next?
And instead they start asking, what won't threaten what I already have?
That one question changes everything.
Because now the house is no longer just a place you live in. It's the central reference point for every decision you make.
Career moves get filtered through it. New business ideas are filtered through it.
Even how you spend your time is filtered through it. This is the moment your flexibility officially dies. And here's the uncomfortable psychological truth behind it all. The human brain prefers a known pain over an unknown opportunity. A predictable monthly financial strain feels safer than taking an unpredictable leap of faith.
So, homeowners start to tolerate levels of stress they would never have accepted otherwise.
You'll hear them say things like, I can't afford to take that risk right now,
or maybe in a few years or once things settle down.
But here's the catch.
Things don't just settle because fixed costs don't relax.
They accumulate.
And with every passing year, that lock gets tighter.
What began as a choice becomes a commitment. That commitment turns into an obligation. And finally, that obligation becomes your identity. I'm a homeowner now. That sentence sounds proud, doesn't it? But it can also be a psychological cage. Because now, questioning that structure feels like questioning yourself. So instead of asking if the house still fits your life, you start forcing your life to fit the house. You optimize around it, you sacrifice for it, you defend it. Not because it's actually helping you anymore, but simply because you've already committed so much to it. This is how people mistake rigidity for stability. Real stability isn't about being unable to move. True stability is having the ability to move without collapsing. A system that breaks the moment you want to change jobs, cities, or life strategies is not stable, it's fragile. But that fragility is completely invisible when everything is going according to plan. So homeowners confuse nothing has gone wrong yet with this is working, and that is a very dangerous assumption. Because life doesn't give you a warning before it shifts. Industries change, health changes, markets change. And when they do, flexibility becomes the only real asset you have. The problem is, by the time you realize you need that flexibility, it's already long gone. This is why so many homeowners feel stuck long before they're willing to admit it. They feel it as hesitation, as excessive caution, as overthinking. They call it being careful, but it isn't. It's the lock-in effect, doing its job perfectly. And in the next phase, the damage gets even deeper. Because once your flexibility is gone, your income becomes fragile. And when your income becomes fragile, everything else follows. When your flexibility disappears, something else quietly takes its place. Dependence. Not emotional dependence, but income dependence. This is where the lock-in effect of homeownership becomes dangerous. Because once a house fixes your expenses, your income can no longer be flexible. It has to be reliable. That single requirement completely rewires your behavior. You stop chasing upside. You start protecting predictability. This is the second mechanism that keeps homeowners stuck. When your fixed costs rise, your brain stops asking, "How can I grow?" It starts asking, "How can I not lose this?" That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. A homeowner doesn't need a high income. They need a consistent one. So what happens? Risk tolerance collapses. Career experiments vanish. Side paths get delayed indefinitely. Uncertain opportunities are rejected almost instantly. Not because they're bad ideas, but because they don't guarantee the next mortgage payment. This is exactly how people with immense potential end up with narrow lives. Now, here's a psychological contradiction most people completely miss. The house itself is already the largest financial risk they've ever taken. You've got leverage, a long-term obligation, and massive market exposure. Yet, once that mortgage is in place, homeowners become allergic to every other form of risk. That isn't rational risk management. That's fear misplacement. The brain panics at the thought of a variable income while completely ignoring the huge fixed exposure of the house. Why? Because the fixed payment feels familiar. Variable income feels uncertain. And humans fear uncertainty far more than they fear actual danger. So they cling to the paycheck. One job, one income stream, one predictable schedule. That single paycheck becomes the pillar holding up their entire life. And anything that threatens it feels like a threat to their very survival. This is how income fragility is born. It doesn't look fragile on the surface because the job is still there. But structurally, it's incredibly brittle. Because when that one source fails, everything collapses. There's no buffer, no alternatives, no optionality. Now, notice how behavior adapts to this pressure. Homeowners become more compliant at work. They start avoiding conflict. They stop negotiating aggressively for raises or promotions. It's not because they lack confidence, but because the perceived cost of rocking the boat feels way too high. They tell themselves things like, "I should just be grateful," or "At least it's stable," or "This isn't the right time to push my luck." Stability becomes the ultimate excuse. And over time, growth stalls. Raises barely beat inflation, if at all. Skills begin to plateau. Your energy drains. But the house doesn't care. The payment is due every single month. So people respond by tightening their grip even further. They cut back on risk even more. They shrink their ambitions. They protect the job harder and harder. This is how the cycle of dependence deepens. And here's the real trap. The longer you stay dependent on that one income, the harder it becomes to ever leave. Your skills narrow, your confidence fades, and your professional network weakens. Soon, even genuinely good opportunities start to feel intimidating. So people wait. They tell themselves, "I'll make a move when things feel safer." But safety never increases inside a rigid structure like this. It only feels safer because you've adapted to the pressure. This isn't security, this is habituation. Your nervous system gets used to the constraint. And once that happens, even the idea of freedom starts to feel risky. That's the true psychological cost of income dependence. Think about this carefully. If your entire life collapses the moment one paycheck stops, you are not secure. You are dangerously exposed. In this scenario, the house didn't create wealth, it created reliance. And reliance always demands obedience. In the next video, we'll expose how this dependence fundamentally warps your decision-making, training your brain to avoid bold moves even when logic is screaming that it's time to act. That's where long-term stagnation truly begins. Did you know that when your income feels fragile, your brain literally changes how it makes decisions? This happens automatically without you even noticing. And this is where the real long-term damage starts. The problem isn't just about money anymore, it's about how your mind evaluates risk. We're talking about decision paralysis. This paralysis doesn't show up as outright fear. Instead, it cleverly disguises itself as being realistic. Let me explain what happens. When every major expense you have is tied to a single, predictable income, your brain starts to automatically reject any choice that introduces even a tiny bit of uncertainty. It's not because the choice is bad, but because uncertainty feels unsafe. So, decisions get filtered out before you even get a chance to consider them properly. Opportunities aren't evaluated. They're dismissed on the spot. You don't think, "Should I take this chance?" Instead, your brain tells you, "This isn't practical right now." That sentence sounds so intelligent, so responsible,
But often it's a lie. Because practicality without any potential for upside is just a fancy word for stagnation.
Let's listen in on the internal dialogue of a mind that feels trapped.
What if this doesn't work out? What if my income drops?
What if I end up regretting this? These questions never lead to action.
They only lead to delay.
And delay feels productive, right? Because you're being careful. But being careful is not the same as being strategic. Being careful is reactive. Strategy, on the other hand, involves taking calculated risks with a proper structure. Paralysis simply avoids risk altogether. This is especially true with something like homeownership if it's not aligned with your financial reality. It trains your brain for paralysis.
Why? Because the penalty for being wrong feels catastrophic.
Miss a payment, fall behind, lose the house. Your brain exaggerates these potential outcomes to enforce extreme caution. This is called threat amplification. The house becomes the ultimate symbol of safety. So even when a fantastic long-term opportunity comes along, it gets rejected because of short-term fears. This is how people sabotage themselves without ever realizing it. They don't fail spectacularly, they just never start. And here's the cruel irony in all of this. The very people who are terrified of losing everything are slowly losing the most valuable asset they have: time.
Years slip by, the house gets older.
The mortgage gets a little smaller, but life doesn't expand. People tell themselves, well, at least I'm not moving backward. But stagnation is moving backward. It's just happening slowly enough to feel acceptable. Decision paralysis doesn't scream at you, it whispers. It disguises itself as patience, as caution, as responsibility. And because society praises all those traits, the behavior goes completely unchallenged.
Nobody questions a homeowner who says, I'm just playing it safe. But safety without any forward momentum is just decay.
Now let's break down the psychological pattern this creates. The brain starts to default to the least disruptive option every single time.
Same job, same routine, same environment.
Even as dissatisfaction starts to grow, the idea of change feels heavier and more daunting than the discomfort of staying put. This is a form of learned helplessness, not born from failure, but from being overconstrained. People literally lose the muscle for making decisions. They stop trusting their own judgment. They start seeking absolute certainty before they're willing to act. But here's the thing, certainty never comes. So life becomes a series of reactions instead of something you actively design. This is why homeowners who are house poor often feel mentally and emotionally exhausted. It's not because they're doing more. It's because they're deciding less. Every choice feels monumental because their financial system has no margin, no buffer. Margin is what allows for boldness. Without it, the brain defaults to inertia. And inertia loves to masquerade as stability. So ask yourself this. If the safe option requires you to suppress your own growth, avoid great opportunities, and tolerate being dissatisfied indefinitely, is it really safe? Or is it just familiar? Familiarity is seductive. It lowers anxiety, but it also kills your potential to evolve. This is the real psychological cost of misaligned homeownership. It's not poverty. It's paralysis. And here's the final twist. Even when people recognize this pattern in their own lives, they often still don't act. Why? Because the last illusion they're holding on to is the most powerful one of all. Ever notice how people can see they're stuck but still refuse to move? It's not a financial problem or a logical one. It's emotional. It's what I call the exit illusion, the belief that you can always fix things later. I'll make a change when life settles down. I'll adjust once the mortgage is smaller. I'll move when the market feels safer. This illusion keeps you waiting for a future version of yourself that never shows up. Why? Because the structure of your life doesn't change on its own. Only time passes. Here's the psychological trick your brain plays on you. It assumes your future self will have more flexibility, more courage, more resources, all without any intentional action on your part today. But fixed systems don't just loosen up over time, they tighten. The payments don't disappear. The obligations don't just soften. And your identity becomes more and more attached to the situation. So your future ends up being a slightly older, more tired copy of your present. This is why homeowners often stay in a house far longer than logic would suggest. They confuse the passing of time with actual progress. But let's look at the deeper mechanism at play here. Selling your home, downsizing, or making any major life change doesn't just threaten your finances. It threatens your self-image. I'm a homeowner.
I've made it. I did the responsible thing. Walking away from that feels like you're going backward, like you're admitting defeat. So, instead of evaluating the actual outcome of their situation, people work to protect their personal narrative. They'll say things like, I'm too invested now to leave, or it wouldn't make sense to start over, or I'll lose everything I've built. This is a classic case of the sunk cost fallacy. The more time, money, and energy you pour into something, the harder it becomes to admit that it's not working. Even if leaving would create a much better future, staying feels like it protects the decisions of your past. Most people will choose to justify their past over optimizing their future. And they'll call it loyalty. But loyalty to a bad system is just self-betrayal. Here's the hard truth. Exiting the situation was easiest in year 1. It got harder in year 5. And by year 10, it's terrifying. Not because the numbers got worse, but because your identity solidified. The house stopped being just a decision you made. It became a part of who you are. And once your identity is on the line, logic loses all its power. This is why well-meaning advice just bounces off. It's why spreadsheets and data don't move people to act. You're not asking them to change a plan. You're asking them to change their entire self-concept, and our self-concepts will fight to survive. So people wait. They tolerate the stress. They push down their dissatisfaction. They convince themselves that this is just what being an adult feels like. But it isn't. It's just delay dressed up as dignity. True freedom doesn't come from enduring more and more pressure. It comes from intentionally designing a life that gives you margin. Margin gives you options. Options create confidence. And confidence is what enables growth. A house, a job, a relationship, it can be a wonderful part of that system, or it can consume the whole thing. The only difference is alignment. Alignment doesn't care about your pride. It only cares about your trajectory. So here is the one question that can shatter the illusion. If you could reset your life today with all the knowledge and experience you have right now, would you choose this exact same structure again? If the answer isn't a clear, immediate yes, then waiting longer isn't going to fix it. Only a redesign will, and choosing to redesign your life is not a failure. The real failure is choosing to stay misaligned. That's where the illusion ends and your real life can begin. Thanks for watching.